Excelente, etcétera.
Thrill me.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Horror Flicks and Guitar Fix podcast. I'm your host, Tim, and today's guest is the award-winning makeup effects artist, Barney Burman. How's it going, man? Thank you for coming on the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course, I'm excited to chat with you about some of your work. We can dive right back to the beginning. Was there a moment in your life that inspired you to go on the path of becoming a makeup effects artist? And if, or if not a moment, maybe like some people and or movies?
I think that was just being born. I think I don't know if it inspired me, but it's fated me at least, because I was raised in and around the world of making monsters. So yeah, my grandfather made the prosthetics for the original Wolfman,
Oh, yeah.
and and masks for the Twilight Zone, and all kinds of different props and things that people didn't know how to make. He was a sculptor and statue maker from the Midwest previously. And so then my father and his brother picked that up. They went off and they started their own studio with John Chambers, who John Goodman played in the movie Argo. And they started then the John Chambers studio outside the big studio system so that they could work with the CIA. And then my brother and his father or my brother and father, my father and his brother bought John Chambers out, and then it became the Berman Studio.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then my father bought out his brother, and it just became his studio, and um, so on down the line. Anyway, so we have a bunch of makeup artists in my family. Also, my mom's brothers, also my brother.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome. So you were literally born into it. So, and you weren't joking,
Yep,
but now and then
surrounded by it.
uh have you've taken over Berman Studios at this point, if I'm not mistaken, right? Or
That is no, that's not correct. Berman
oh,
Studio is over. My father retired. I started my own studio, um, which was Proteus Effects in 2004, and then it changed to B2 Effects around 2010.
thank you. No, that's awesome. And of course, one of your first gigs, of course, I know you did like some assistant work and some other stuff, but if I'm not mistaken, one of your first actual makeup effects artist gigs was the film House. What was it like, jumping in on something like that was so makeup effects driven, to begin with, and something with such fun, effects work?
That was great. I really enjoyed that. A man named James Cummins hired me. He was the designer and supervisor. That was my first job outside of my family.
Oh yeah.
First time somebody that wasn't my family hired me, and I made some good lifelong friends there. And um, uh, it was a lot of work and a lot of fun. It was crazy because we started in a office building, like the second floor of an office building in what is now the Burbank Media Center. Then it was called the Golden Mall, and we worked out of an office building that was above a liquor store. And on my first day, I went down to go. I left my apartment to go to work. I walked down into the carport, and my motorcycle had been stolen.
Oh shit.
That was my first day on the job.
That's a nightmare for sure. But uh and of course, like you mentioned, you meet some lifelong friends. That's one thing I love about the movie House is it's made by Steve Miner and Sean S. Cunningham, who have done a lot of films together and bring a lot of people on. It seems like, like they always have Kane Hodder on stunts, and certain Harry Manfredini does a lot of their scores and stuff. So it's almost like they have a little family crew that goes around with some of their
Hmm.
films. Of course, you ended up working on, stuff like Fright Night Part 2 and, Body Snatchers and stuff, a bunch of other fun horror films. But I know you also ended up working alongside Tony Gardner and Alterian quite a bit throughout the years. What's it like building, these relationships with, like you kind of mentioned with Mr. Cummings, how about, like you made some lifelong friends. What's it like, when you build these relationships and get those callbacks, to come back and work with these people years in and years out?
Yeah, well, it's a journey, and you just never realize what the journey is going to be while you're in it. Only upon reflection can you kind of see that.
Yeah.
Um, I've been really fortunate to be a part of to different degrees, a lot of really fun and some very iconic films. Um, you mentioned Tony Gardner. As far as the journey goes, I first interviewed with him when he was doing The Blob,
Oh yeah.
and my brother's girlfriend at the time was going to be working with the guy who was doing The Blob, which is whose name escapes me. And then Tony was doing all the people effects, and this other guy was doing The Blob. There's a guy that did uh, Audrey too in Little Shop of Horrors.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, he was into the Blob, and my brother's girlfriend was working for him in the same big warehouse studio that Tony was building the sort of people effects for. And my brother's girlfriend did not like me, and she blocked my being hired.
Oh
But I
shit.
didn't know that. What I knew is I met with Tony. I thought it was really great. We had a good time. I thought it was, I was a shoe in to go and work there, and then I never got called, and I was really like disappointed and probably a little bitter about that, not understanding what happened. Um, and so I just figured, they didn't like me for
Yeah.
whatever reason. But then years later, he called me to go do this makeup with him on Chris Pratt. This is like, 20 years later. Um, and we did this kind of heavyweight makeup on Chris Pratt for What's Your Number in Boston. And we got along so well, and we just kept kind of coming back and working together. Um, and he kept hiring me after that. And he's now just, a very dear friend.
Oh yeah.
You just never know what the journey is going to be, like I said, until you have hindsight and go, oh, now I see how these things connected.
Yeah. The hell yeah. And of course, you worked on one of the recent horror films that I really enjoyed, a horror comedy, of course, Studio 666, along with the
Mm.
Alterian crew. What was some of the stuff that you worked on throughout that film? Because that one's filled with like these fun practical effects as well.
Yeah, that was really a lot of fun. I'd worked with Dave Grohl previously doing for Tenacious D, where he played the devil,
Oh yeah.
and and he was terrific. And it was really nice to work with him and his crew, his whole band. And there were just different demons and that were sort of scattered throughout it. Um, I had a really good time working on that. The only issue was that there it was like kind of the height of COVID, and everybody was wearing masks and being really careful, and it was really strenuous, and we had to go and get tested and like spit into cups every morning, and it was it was a strange time to be working at all. But I'd say if you have to go through something like that, at least it was with like a really terrific group of people.
Yeah. No, hell yeah. No, it seemed like a fun shoot to be on and stuff like that. Well, not fun shoot because of
Absolutely.
like you said, but like for those reasons, but for the just because it was
Well, it's fun
so
because it was like Dave's passion project. He
yeah.
wanted to make this, and it's funny. I made this broken leg on this young actress, and she was just so sweet. Um, and I was talking to her as I'm making up her leg, this big wound on her leg, and she had just gotten a call to go play Wednesday in the next iteration of the Addams Family. It was Jenna. Um, and she was just so nice to work with. She's just a lovely person.
Oh yeah. No, I do horror movie trivia night. So one of the questions I always throw out when I'm doing like I'll do certain themes per round. So if I'm doing like a new release question, sometimes I'll throw out what's the three films that Jenna Ortega was in 2022, and people always forget that she's in that because she's it's so quick at the beginning and then a little bit
Yeah,
more at the end and stuff. So
yeah,
uh, no, I love that. It's crazy when you see stuff like that when people, have such small roles in something the same year that their movie blows up. Like
yeah.
Nev Campbell. Ironically, with her doing Scream, the same year she did The Craft, where she's like the third
Hmm.
friend. She did Scream, and one's like exploded for her. So,
Hmm.
but no, heck yeah. And then of course, to kind of just piggyback off of, we'll jump around a little bit in the career here, just to piggyback off of the certain films and stuff. But you mentioned working with Dave Grohl over on Tenacious D. Which creating that devil, how was it? What was some of the influences you guys used, to create it, and what was the like? How did you balance, keeping the humor of the film, but also just making the devil look metal as fuck and awesome?
Well, thank you for that. They had shot the ending of it a year prior, and they had a different guy named Derek Mears, who's very popular like creature effects and as a performer and does a lot of genre movies. He's one of the villains in was it Battle Angel? Mattia, something Battle Angel.
I know he's
Um,
Jason in the Friday the 13th
yeah,
remake as
yeah,
well. So yeah.
he's done that. So he played the devil, and
Oh,
we put him on stilts and had him really tall and these really incredible horns, and he was really demoned out, and and they kind of said from the beginning they wanted they wanted kind of a big red, somewhat legend, like Tim Curry and Legend type demon, but we did this big silicone makeup on him. It was really elaborate. And then they shot the movie, and then a year later they came back and said, "Hey, we're going to shoot a new ending," because Dave Grohl wasn't available initially. But they said, "We're going to shoot a new ending, and Dave Grohl has become available, and we want to redo the Devil and do it on him, and we want it to be more Legend, Tim Curry and Legend like,
yeah,
but we also want it to be pared down at the same time, so we have more of Dave coming through instead of artifice of creature on the outside of a performer. Does that make sense?
yeah.
So yeah, we just redesigned the whole thing, and I and it was a really great time. It was it was very fun.
Oh yeah.
I was really happy to be able to do it again because I kind of thought, well, you never get a chance to do something and think, God, if I could only have done that over, here's what I would have done. So I was much more pleased with the outcome.
Right. I know some of these low budget films that you hear they reshot the whole thing like in a violent nature. You hear that they pretty much shot
Mhm.
that twice because of certain aspects, I was like, how do they even low budget stuff, how do they afford, just the time to do it? So now I know exactly what you mean. Like especially with
Well, look at
makeup
that Evil
effects.
Dead. They even made, it wasn't Evil Dead made like four times.
Yeah.
It didn't start off as like a student project, and then he ends up getting a little bit of money to make it, and then I think he made it again, which was Evil Dead, and then makes it basically again, which is Evil Dead 2. So it's just, getting better and better at doing one thing and sort of honing not just your craft, but your style. And that really kind of stuck with him.
Yeah. And then luckily being available to come back because you guys stay so busy with, especially doing movies
Yeah,
and television and stuff and then jumping,
yeah,
helping out different studios and as well as doing your own studios. So
absolutely.
but heck yeah. And then of course, while we're in the comedy realm, I'll go ahead and ask about if I'm not mistaken, you did Tom Cruise's Les Grossman for Tropic Thunder.
That's right.
What was that like? Tom Cruise seems very method. Was he in there being a goofball, or was he still very straightforward? And
I don't think of him as method. He was very personable,
heck yeah,
very quite magnanimous, generous with his time, and knew that it was going to be a process to get that character and find out what his look is. And we did 4 or 5 makeup tests before we ever got to the final result. Um, and I'd say the only demand, if you can even call it that, he ever made was after the first makeup test, which took us about 4.5 hours. He looked and he says, "How long is this going to take on the day?" And I'm like, "Well, it's hard to tell and be specific. It's elaborate, blah blah blah." And he goes, "You got 2 hours."
goddamn.
Okay, that's it. So we will figure out how to prep this makeup in a way that it goes on in 2 hours, and we got it down.
Heck yeah. No, and I guess I think method, but that's probably the wrong word. He just is willing to go to an extreme, like the stunts he does, and
Absolutely.
yeah, stuff like that. But
Absolutely. He knows, he loves the business. He knows everybody's job. Not that he can do everybody's job, but he knows what it is.
yeah.
So his awareness, he's very understanding of what you need to get it done. And I love that.
No, I love that story. Glenn Powell told about how he brought him to the Twisters premiere and how the whole time he was like just like an excited kid at a movie because it was so full of stunts and crazy effects. He was like, dude, this is awesome. It was
That's exactly. He's kind of like just an excited kid. I love that about him.
yeah, heck yeah. No, and then of course you also worked on, a couple years before that, you worked on two remakes, The Thing, or not The Thing, The Ring and Dawn of the Dead, which both of them kind of took a different approach, to how they uh, you know, did the remake. One was very close, in look and stuff like that, in style to the original, and then one, of course, was a brand new zombie look. At least in comparison to the original Dawn of the Dead. What were some of the approaches you guys took on those, and then what was it like, working on something like that that has such an IP that's beloved?
Well, it's interesting, and this is how these things connect. Um, I had worked with Rick Baker and Kazuhiro doing Haunted Mansion.
Oh yeah.
And one of the things, a makeup that Kazu and I did together was there was a very tall, skinny guy named Michael Johnson who we did the skeleton makeup on. But, and this is Kazu's sort of influenced, he decided, let's try doing this kind of from scratch and building it up on the guy using latex and gelatin, like layers of latex and then gelatin and then latex and gelatin, and just layer it up like that. So we did that makeup on Haunted Mansion for some tests. I'm not sure, I think he ended up not being used in that fashion in the film, but then I went right from that to go work with Dave Anderson on Dawn of the Dead. And I said, hey, I was just using this technique with Kazu to build up this makeup. Well, I think it'd be really good to do with these zombies. So we incorporated that same technique of latex and gelatin buildup to create those zombies in Dawn of the Dead. And then after that, I think it was after that, I went to do the ring, and that's the process we used to do the girl,
Yeah.
whose name escapes me,
Samara, I think.
um,
Yeah.
Samara, thank you, in the ring. The first one, the second one, there was a different um, technique using different materials. Uh, but that first one was just all like just layers of built up stuff to make her just like drippy and gooey and sort of like puckered from water.
Oh yeah.
But I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it's like all these things connected. And again, that's just talking about like looking back and seeing how the journey kind of flows together.
Yeah. No, and I meant to kind of ask you at the beginning when I asked about, how your career started. I know that you grew up in like, with a lot of, you know, film people in your family. Were you a horror fan at all, or were you just kind of a fan film in general and horror fell into it as well?
I was somewhat of a horror fan in like middle school, like junior high. I remember seeing, Halloween and Prom Night and Terror Train and loving those movies. But at the same time, I was going to see Incredible Shrinking Woman and 9 to 5. And so I really loved movies
Oh yeah.
in general. That just ones that entertain me, what if it worked. I remember watching Superman as a kid, with Christopher Reeve and thinking, wow, just so moved by it. It's still my favorite superhero movie.
Yeah. No, the movie magic in it holds up this many years later is
Yeah,
wild. So
completely.
no, it's a beautiful movie. Do you have some favorite horror films from over the years?
Yeah, I hate to seem boring, but to me, it's like the best of the best are just going to be The Exorcist and The
Okay.
Shining. And the original Halloween, I think, is absolutely one of the best, the top three horror films ever made. It's so simple. There's very little blood in it. It's kind of like Jaws. It's this terrifying thing that just keeps coming and won't stop. And this girl's running away and nobody will listen, and she can't find anybody to listen. And um, so, all those films of the 70s, I think it's very hard to beat. You can be more sensational, but it's really hard to beat the simplicity and the reality of the way those stories were told.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. They had to like make it work in a way that it's all in front of the camera as well,
Yeah.
where not that there's anything wrong with CGI and like it does some cool things these days, but it's crazy to watch stuff like that back in the day and how sometimes like they would tell a story with just the landscape, you know what I mean? Which I mean they still do that,
Yeah.
but it's fewer and far between, So
Yeah.
heck yeah. And then of course, to kind of bring things full circle with your grandfather, doing the Wolfman and stuff. You did a werewolf of your own on Grimm, as well as a bunch of other, creature effects and stuff like that. What was it like working
Yeah.
on the show Grimm and being able to do your own adaptations of all these like classic characters and creatures and stuff?
It really was a pleasure to be part of that. The crew up in Portland was definitely one of the best crews I've ever worked with. And then we built on all the makeup effects and creatures down in my studio in North Hollywood. So I kept going back and forth. And it's hard to really express the gratitude I feel for being able to make so many different varied creatures um, over like a 6 season time that so many people don't ever get to make, or it's like they dream of, oh, I'd like to make a werewolf sometime. We made, I don't know, dozens of werewolves for
Yeah.
that. We made, you know, just about every style of ripped out throat you can imagine. We could like we kept thinking like, how are we going to do this? It doesn't look like the thing we did before, but we don't want to reuse what we used before. Who gets to make a lava man that glows from the inside, or a an original like golem clay mud creature.
Yeah.
It was always stressful because the time being TV was very short, and yet I don't think there was a single creature that I walked away thinking, well, we screwed that one up.
No, that's
Somehow we always managed to pull it off. And they were just it was a terrific show. It was a terrific group of people making the show. And the people I had working in my studio were brilliant and dedicated and very talented.
oh yeah. No, and I miss shows like that. Of course, you still got some shows that have creatures and stuff. Like Star Trek and Star Wars will always have a bunch of cool stuff. But it's not like the classic monsters that you see and the classic things that you grew up with that you get to create for those. But
Yeah, yeah,
you had shows back in the day like the Hercules show as well as the Xena show that did cool stuff like that. And
sure.
but I feel like it definitely lacks on television these days. We need a Grimm return for sure.
I agree.
Well, hell yeah. And then of course, throughout the years you killed it in the makeup effects department, but you've also popped in and out as an actor. And then, just recently you directed your own film in Wild Boar, which you also acted in as well. What's it like being on both sides of the camera, and what was it like, especially getting to, do your directorial debut and, do the circuit with that film?
It was fantastic. I
Oh,
had such a good time. It was one of the best things I've done. Um, and I don't know if I've ever worked as hard as I did to get that movie done. I just knew that it was something that I couldn't not do. Um, Being on both sides of the camera was only a couple of 2 or 3 days, and it was very interesting, and I had a really, really fun time. It was some of the best times I had because it's just, it's like playing dress up for Halloween, and then everybody's there to watch you do it and support you doing that. Um, I don't love Halloween costume parties where you dress up and you go to a party and you're just like, I'm here and I look like this.
yeah.
But when you can dress up and go and perform and be that character, be that creature, be whatever it is you're going to be, and have it something that everybody's supporting, sort of getting that on film. There's a very sort of palpable excitement to all of that. And I had a great cast as well as a great crew, but the cast, including Augie Duke and um, Danny Roebuck, were so incredible and supportive, and they really brought their A game to it. They could have just said, "Well, I'm here. It's a no budget thing, and I don't care," but they didn't. Everybody seemed really into trying to do their best work. And I'm really proud of everybody that worked on that. Proud of myself for seeing it through as well.
Oh yeah. Any
Being
plans to
self-motivated to get something like that done over the years is challenging.
right? No, heck yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. It's like you keep picking up things here and there, but I can understand it being like a daunting task when you see how big, you've seen firsthand how hard it is to be a director, so I can see where it's be scary to want to jump behind the chair yourself for the first, especially after, being in the business, as a makeup effects artist, you don't know if people for so long, you don't know if somebody will be like, "Oh, he don't direct, does makeup effects." Just like they do with actors and actresses until they knock it out of the park and stuff. So,
Yeah. Well, I think, the best directors and even the best makeup effects people, we're all kind of storytellers. And it's a corny phrase, but it's true. It's even um, I don't know, sometimes I could be doing a simpler makeup and just like someone's got to be a little bit grungy or something. And I think, well, let's put a scratch or something on the cheek like this, going through the woods, this branch caught him. And you just start working with the actors, of course, but just start fabricating what that has happened, where they've come from. Something, even if it's not necessarily explained in the script, it's somehow telling a story that there's life that's been unfolding. And I've always been attracted to that.
Oh yeah. That's almost like the adults that keep their imagination are the ones that are great at actually like you said, telling the stories, whether it's used for, makeup effects or if it's used for, creating a character to act or whether it's directing a movie or writing a movie. But no, I agree. And I love seeing people cross over and stuff, like even do other jobs. Like Giovanni Ribisi just did cinematography on Strange Darling, and that was awesome. Like,
Right? Oh my God, and such a beautiful job.
you know,
That was a very cool film, and his cinematography was just gorgeous. I
so I'm
hope he
with
does more of that.
Same here. So I'm with you. It's and also like the people that learn the business throughout the years are obviously the ones that are primed to step into those roles because they know what's going to be asked of them. They're not going to be overwhelmed with it or overtaken. So, uh, any plans to jump back into the director's chair, or like I know if you don't have any plans yet, do you? I don't, is there something you hope to do?
Well, I definitely have plans. I have
Hell yeah.
some projects that are brewing, um, and a couple of them are potentially very close. So fingers crossed.
Oh yeah, no, I'll be looking out for it for sure. But and then pretty much I only have like one more question I like to ask all my guests before I throw it back to you to promote anything. Of course, you could re-promote Wild Boar and where people can find it. But do you have a horror story of your own? And it could be from a day on set that's gone wrong, or something in your personal life that's scary. And if you have a paranormal story, you're more than welcome to share that as well.
Uh, I don't know if I have paranormal stories. I had some kind of what I would call some spiritually connected experiences, but I when you say if I have any horror stories, I won't mention in detail about what project it was.
Okay.
But I'll say there was a show that I was on, and it was a very poorly run production. And I was running the set. It wasn't my job as far as the shop build goes. Um, but the shop that was doing the build wasn't producing the stuff that we needed each day. And the production on set was yelling at me. Literally, the director and the whole crew gathered around was screaming at me specifically about ruining his film. Um, and I was so miserable. And I remember going back to the effects truck, and the first AD, who was a very dear friend, he comes to me and he says, Barney, what was the worst job you ever had? And I said, honestly, this is it. Well, I said, I'd rather be flipping burgers than ever come back and do this. And I ended up being a scapegoat, and then they actually fired me later on. But I mean, I was completely in between a rock and a hard place,
Yeah.
and felt really alone. I felt really sad and alone because I didn't get support from the studio that was doing the build, and I didn't get support from the filmmakers, and nobody was understanding one or the other. I was just completely in between and unable to affect the change one way or the other.
Yeah.
Um, but that was just not a pleasant. So I really look forward. People say, do you want, who would you like to work with? It's like, I don't know who I'd want to work with. I want to work with people that are respectful and enjoyable to be around and know that we're all collaborating and trying our best to get something done. Because when you don't have sort of that human connection, it's just a really hard um, profession. It's a hard business to be in.
Yeah. No, that's why I always hate when you hear about all these big names come out and you hear that this person's an asshole or this person's that. It's like, man, there's so many people out there to support. You want to support the good people, so it sucks when you find out you've been supporting a dickhead the whole time or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But uh
Nobody wants that.
Yeah. No, and especially when you find out like that's the one thing is when they start to blame other people, it's like ownership is one of the main things that make people, want to work with you again and uh like you as a person, you know what I mean? So just take ownership of your shit and don't pawn it off on other people. But I'm sorry you had to go through that, but I definitely can see how that's a horror story, especially when you're stuck and then but at least
It's a growing process. You take the hard ones and you learn from them and you move on.
yeah. No, hell yeah. Well, at least you got through it and shit got on to direct your own film and hopefully you get to do it again. And I know you got some stuff. Do you have anything you want to promote? I know you got some conventions coming up and as well as wherever people can find Wild Boar.
There are some conventions coming up. I don't have the list of them in front of me. I wish I did. Something in Houston later this year, I think in September or August, and then something in Atlanta. I just don't remember the names of the conventions at this time. I should have had that ready. But and then Wild Boar is available on Amazon,
Oh yeah.
and as there are some other streaming services as well, but Amazon I think is pretty easy to find. Oh, it's also I put I as a way of self-promotion and branding, I it's officially called Barney Burman's Wild Boar. And whereas I like just wild boar better, apparently it's very hard for people to find sometimes. You type in wild boar and you get like a phone book of
Oh yeah.
possibilities. But if you look up Barney Burman's Wild Boar, it's very easy to find. And I would request people rate and review it. I I validate everybody's opinion. You can like it or dislike it, it's all okay. I just I kind of want to hear it, and I want to see what your rating is. And I have had some really good conversations with people who didn't love it, but it stimulated some thought. And there's actually one woman at a film festival that came up to me and said, "Thank you, I am now a vegetarian." We turned her into a vegetarian. I love that.
You're like, well, I did one thing, I guess. Yeah, hell yeah. No, and definitely. Do you have anything else like makeup effects wise that's coming out that you want to promote, or is pretty much just Wild Boar it at the moment that
Not that I can talk about yet. I've been itching. It's been actually a year that I've been was connected to something that I can't talk about, and it's trying to drive me mad until it comes out.
Yes, sir. Well, I'll keep an eye out for any announcements and stuff like that, especially on your page. And I appreciate you for coming on the show. It was a blast chatting with you.
Oh, it's good talking to you. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Enjoy the rest of your day. I'll
You too.